You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat B'Shemesh Israel 5778, 2018. This week's Parsha is Parsha Shmini. If you are outside of Israel, if you're inside of Israel, it's Tazria Metzora. We are going to learn together some ideas about Parsha Shmini. That's what we're going to focus on this week. I'd like to share with you a medrash and some verses in Proverbs in Mishlei, chapter 9, and the very beginning of our Parsha, Seder Shmini, Vayhi Bayam Shmini, and it was on the 8th day. So we had, the Parsha begins with the 8th day of the construction of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle, which was also the first day of the month of Nisan. Nisan is the month when we celebrate Passover, Pesach. It's the month of redemption. It's the month of our future redemption, of when Mashiach, Messiah, is going to arrive, Mashiach ben David. And all of this took place. The 8th day is the day which is also the first day. It's the day when we enter into a new relationship with God. The Mishkan, our sages tell us, it's brought down for the first 7 days, which were the last 7 days of Adar, the first 7 days of the Hakamas HaMishkan, of the erection of the Tabernacle. Those 7 days, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who was involved in the service of God. He was the priest, as it were. He was the one bringing the korbanos, the sacrifices. And then, on the 8th day, Aaron the high priest, took over. Henceforth, he and his sons would be those who would do the avodah, do the service inside of the Mishkan. First 7 days, and then the 8th day. So here we are on the 8th day. And on the 8th day, the cloud, the Anan, which represented the presence of God, came down onto the Mishkan. And there it rested, to represent the fact that God was entering into a relationship with the Jewish people, and the Jewish people were to come to serve God through the Kohanim. The priests were to act on their behalf to develop this relationship between Hashem, between God and the Jewish people. Vayhi Bayam Shmini, the Medrash tells us, very interesting, the Medrash brings a pasuk. It's the beginning of Mishlei, and I'd like to read you all of the pasukim which are quoted here. The Medrash only brings certain parts of the verse. I'd like to read to you the entire verses. Chachmais ban sebesa. The verse tells us that it is through wisdom that the house is built. Chatzva amudei shiva. And the verse refers to the seven amudim, the 7 things that hold up the binyan, that hold up the building. The 7 pillars that hold it up. Tavcha tivcha, mascha yena. The animals are slaughtered. The wine is poured. Af orcha shulchana. The table is prepared. So we have a house. The house is built. What is this referring to? So in our context, we're going to see that it refers to a number of different things. We need to understand the parallels between all of these different things. But in our context, Pashup Shat, as the reason that we're bringing this verse is because it's referring to the building of the tabernacle, the house of God. And there are 7 pillars within that house. And there is animals are slaughtered. They're brought there. The table is set. We have the shulchan. Shulchan Nariseo Tikra. We call out to the Na'arim, the young ones, the young people. Al Gapim Remi Kores. I'm not sure exactly what this verse means, but for now, I need to leave it. Mi pesi yasser hena. Who is the fool who will turn here? Chasar lev amraloi. The one who is missing heart. The one who is missing the heart, who it is said to him. So we speak about the building of the house. We speak about the 7 pillars that hold up the house. We speak about the fact that there is something missing. There's a chasar lev. There's a lacking of heart. Listen carefully to this part. It's important to understand. Lechu lachamu belachmi. Go and eat my bread, ushesu biyayin masachti, and drink the wine that has been used as part of the libations. Verse 6, Isu b'sam v'chiu, let the fools leave and live, Ishu b'derech Binah, and in so doing, they will affirm the path of wisdom. Of Binah, really, Binah is understanding. So we see here, there's a reference here to different aspects, and these aspects are the spheros. The 7 are the 7 lower spheros, which we speak about the 7 days of the week, which are 6th and 7th. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but we need to know that they are here, that there's references here to them. The 7th is Malchus, which is Shabbos, the 6 days of the week. The 7th day is Shabbos. Then we have the 8th aspect, which we know from Hanukkah. The 8th aspect has to do with the supernatural. 7 is Teva, is nature. The 8th aspect is the supernatural, Me'al HaTeva. There's the 9th aspect, which is Chachma. And there's a 10th aspect, which doesn't seem to be, it's the hidden aspect, which doesn't seem to be mentioned here, which is the concept of Keser, which is the all-inclusive, transcendental aspect. Now, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, that's okay. It's okay. You can come back in right now. And we need to understand that we're speaking about here a construct. We're speaking about the Mishkan. And the Mishkan, we're going to see parallels of a few different things. The first thing the Medrash tells us that these verses refer to is the construct of the Brias Ha'olam, of the creation of the world. And we're going to see that it also corresponds to the aspect of the war of Gog and Magog, the war of Armageddon that occurs before the third temple is built. There's a building of the third temple, which is a result of the war of Armageddon of Gog and Magog. And we also see there's a reference to Torah itself, the Torah itself, which is a construct which represents the building of the relationship between God and man. And then finally we have the Oyel Moed, we have what we are speaking about, which is the construction of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle. And what all of these things have in common, all of these aspects that we're speaking about, creation of the world, creation of the third temple, creation of the Torah, creation of the Tabernacle, all of these things have to do with a relationship which is being created between God and man, between God and the Jewish people. The way that occurs is through a certain rubric. It occurs through a certain set of it's like there's a certain misgeret, is the word in Hebrew. There's a construct through which Hashem, God is transcendent. God is beyond anything that we can perceive. God is both entirely beyond the world, but also God infuses, it's like he's like the soul of the world, as it were. So how does God interact with us? How does God, who is beyond time, who is beyond space, who's beyond anything physical, how does he interact with us? And the answer to that question is what the Medrash is talking about, and what these verses are talking about, which have to do with these spheres, which I don't want to get into the details of how they work. It's not relevant to us at this moment. But what we do see is that there's a certain tahalich, there's a certain process through which Hashem interacts with us. And it's extremely interesting. We're going to describe the process in terms that we can understand. Let's see the Medrash. Let's see how it speaks about it. Rabbi Ahava Bar Kahana Pasach. Rabbi Ahava Bar Kahana began speaking and said like this: Chachmais ban sebesa. Like we said in the verse, wisdom builds the house. Tav chatifcha, there's a slaughtering that takes place. Shochan hariseh, there's a sending out of the young people. Mi pesi, who is the fool, etc. Each of these different aspects we're going to speak about. Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Eloi Pasar Kra Bebrisa Shalolim. This is speaking about the covenant of the world, right? The bris. We have to understand what this is referring to. But I'm sorry, Bebriyasa Shalolim. I read it wrong. I said Bebrisa Shalolim. It's Bebriyasa Shalolim. It's the creation of the world, right? There's also a covenant in the creation of the world, right? But there's an aspect that occurs here that's 7 days, and an 8th aspect, which we need to understand as well. What is the wisdom that's building the home? That's a reference to God. It's the verse tells us, also in Proverbs, that God with his wisdom founded the land. That's how he created the world, was with wisdom. That's the foundation. It's at the root essence, which is very interesting, because chachma is something which is transcendent. Wisdom is something which, when we look at the human body, so the mind sits inside, the brain sits inside of here, the wisdom is inside of the head, right? The kalim of action. How do we interact with the world? How do we accomplish? It's through our hands, it's through our feet, it's through our body. Our mind controls all of that which goes on with our body, but it's in the mind, right? That infuses everything. That's the force that infuses all of our actions with meaning, and it creates the possibility for us to be able to act. So Hashem, in his wisdom, God's wisdom infuses the creation of the world. Chatzva amudei shiva. The 7 pillars of the world were hewn. Elu shivim bereshis. What are the 7 pillars of the world? It's the 7 days of creation, Shenemar. As the verse says, Ki sheshes yamim v'gomer. The verse refers to the 6 days, etc. God blessed the 7th day. Okay, and there's a blessing. The blessing that comes out on the 7th day. That's how God creates the world. Tavcha tivcha. Now, the Medrash tells us, so there's a 7-day process. But now, how does that 7-day process culminate? It culminates where God says there's a slaughtering that happens. There's a preparation that's made for the feast. What's the preparation that's made for the feast? God said, let the land bring forth all of the living things that were to come forth from the earth, the animals and the plants. All of these things were to be part of the mission of Adam HaRishon, of Adam, to use all of these forces in the service of God. There's an aspect of the wine being prepared. What's this wine? Says the Medrash, it has to do with the gathering of the waters. The table was set. What is the table being set? Everything is prepared and ready for Adam HaRishon, for the first man to come onto the scene. God called out to the servants, to the young people who are to serve him. Who are they? This is Adam and Eve. They were obviously very young. It was their first day of existence. So Hashem created a situation. The situation was predicated on the fact that there would be a possibility for sin. There would be a possibility that man would do something wrong. He called them gods. Right? That's what the Nachash said to them. You have the potential to be like God, to be like Hashem. What's after all of this great praise? Which fool shall turn away? They left God's will. They decided to go against God's will and instead followed the Eitzah, the advice of the snake. That's why they were referred to as those who are lacking heart, lacking wisdom. That's why God said to him, to Adam and Eve, you came from the earth and you shall return to the earth, from dust to dust. So it's very interesting because Hashem told them that they were godly, or Hashem imbued them with godliness. The Nachash, the snake, used that godliness and said to them, you could be like God. God doesn't want you to eat from this tree. If you eat from the tree, you're going to be like him. They were supposed to be like God. They were supposed to be imbued with godliness. The way that they were supposed to be like God was by listening to God, by subduing their own belief as to how to serve God or how to become like God, and listening to God's will as to how they were to become like God. So it's very interesting because God separates them. He opens the possibility for them to make a mistake. He makes them feel like they are godly, that they are self-propelled, that they are the Yisum Kelahim. They are to be like God. God, Shasitan. He opened up the possibility for a mistake. So we see that there's a process here. God sets up the whole thing. He sets up the whole world. He sets up the whole creation here. And this is going to be true. I'm not going to get into all of the details in regards to everywhere else. We see that it's true in regards to Gog Magog, the future. Mashiach is going to come. We see that it's true in regards to the Torah itself. We see that's true in regards to the Oil Moed. And I do want to read in regards to the Oil Moed because that is the topic of our Parsha. I want to speak about the Tabernacle as well. And we see there's a setup. Everything is set up. Man comes onto the scene. There's a separation that takes place. There's a sense that man has that he is separate. The purpose of the separateness is that so man will come back into a relationship with God, right? Originally, Adam HaRishon is created as an androgynous being. He is both male and female. Adam and Chava were created as one being. God separates them, breaks them apart, brings them back together. And they have that Began Eden Mikedem, they have that chasana, that wedding, And then they come back into that relationship, that love. The love is only possible when they're separated. Man is also separated in a certain sense from God so that he can return into that relationship. Man makes a mistake, separates further from God, follows the advice of the snake. Interestingly, when it comes to the Mishkan, however, that's not the case. In the case of the Mishkan, there's a coming into the relationship. There's a loss of relationship, which the Medrash refers to, which I'm not going to read inside. There's a loss of relationship that occurs with the sin of the Egel, with the sin of the golden calf. Interestingly, which Aaron HaKohen himself was involved with. Perhaps we'll touch on that soon. Let me read to you inside this verse and how it applies to the Mishkan, to the Tabernacle. Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana Pasar Kroya B'Yom Moed. Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana explained the verses to be speaking about the Tabernacle. Chachma is bonsa beisa. Wisdom created the house, built the house. Ze Betzalel. This is a reference to Betzalel. Betzalel was the young man who crafted the Mishkan. V'amalei oisei ruach Elohim. He is filled with the Spirit of God. V'gamer tzedach chatzva modeh shiva. 1 second, before we get to that. So we see that Hashem manifested, he blew, like we said before, there was something which started up in Chachma, which started up in the mind, which manifested in the clay Maisa, which manifested in the parts of the human body, or the parallels to the human body, which are what we refer to as the vessels of action, which are the hands and the feet. Betzalel was the hands of God, as it were. He stood in the shadow of God. Hashem manifested through Betzalel. God manifested in the world through him. He was filled with that wisdom. Shiva, and then there was a seven pillars. That's a reference to the 7 days which we spoke about at the very beginning. The beginning of the construction of the Mishkan, when Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who was in charge, when he was the one bringing the karbanis, when he was the one who was putting up the Mishkan and bringing it back down again for 7 days. This is a reference to what it says in the verse in Vayikra chapter 8 verse 33, that for 7 days your hands will be filled. And the Meforshim explained that during those 7 days Moshe Rabbeinu was doing the Avodah, was doing the service, and Aaron HaKohen was following him and watching, and his sons were following him and watching how the service was to be done. Tavcha Tivcha, the animals were slaughtered. Elu HaKarbanos, this is a reference to the sacrifices which were brought. Mascha Yena, Elu HaNesachim, the wine was poured. This is reference to the libations. Af Orcha Shulchana, the table was set. Zesider Lechem Apanim, this is reference to the ordering of the Lechem Apanim placed on the Shulchan, the table inside of the tabernacle. Shulchan Arisei Tikra Zeh Moshe, who was the youth, as it were, who was involved in the service. This is a reference, Zeh Moshe. This is Moses himself, that for 7 days he was doing the Avodah. And that's what it means when it says on the 8th day, Moshe Rabbeinu called out to Aaron and his sons. It was very interesting because if we look at the verses, we don't really see a reference or a blatant reference to the 8th aspect. We see the number 7, the 7 days of Miluim. Where's the 8th aspect? Which is on the 8th day that Aaron HaKohen comes, and that's a reference to the concept of Binah. Binah, which is the aspect of understanding, which is right brain. The right brain, by the way, is really the left, right? Because the right brain controls the left side of the human body, right? So it's the left aspect. That's the right brain. The brains are reversed. So that's reference to what it says here. First we have Izvu P'sam V'chiu. First we have the mistake of the Pesi, the separation. And where do we see the separation over here? And I believe that the separation is in the 7 days. It's in the 7 days. And who's in charge of the separation aspect? It's Moshe Rabbeinu, interestingly. Moshe Rabbeinu is the aspect, as the Mekubalim speak, Moshe Rabbeinu is the aspect of Netzach. He's the one who separates. He's the one who forces. The Jewish people have to be forced by Moshe to do what's right. Moshe is that aspect of forcing. And whenever there's forcing, so there's my will and there's your will. Your will is not aligned with my will when I force you to do my will. Right? So that's an aspect of separation. Moshe Rabbeinu is Netzach. The first 7 days represent that Klal Yisrael is not doing it of their own volition. In a certain sense, they're being forced, and that's why the Mishkan is being taken down and picked back up during the 7 days. It's knocked down, picked back up, knocked down, picked back up. On the 8th day, what happens is there's a completion, and that's the Binah aspect here. That's the heart. The heart comes in. When do you win the person's heart? When do you have that the person wants to do it? When do I convince my heart that I want to do God's will? Izu p'sayim v'chiu. Fools, leave the way you've been doing it and live. Ishru b'derech Binah, and affirm, validate the path of Binah, the path of understanding, of wisdom, of heart. Right? So we see that there's an aspect of affirmation. When it comes to the 8th aspect, very interesting. And this is what I want to bring out from here, and this is the bottom line of what I believe is going on in the creation of the world. And in all of these other aspects that's going on when it comes to the Torah, the way that we relate to God, when it comes to the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, the first 7 days, the first 7 aspects have to do with God saying, here, look, this is what you got to do. This is God's will, but I'm not choosing to do it. We don't yet have a relationship. In the 6 days of creation, and even in Shabbos, when there's a stepping back and a lack of movement, we still don't fully have that relationship yet. The relationship doesn't gel until we get to the 8th aspect. The 8th aspect is a transcendent aspect. It's the first place where we see transcendence, right? The 8th aspect is in the mind. Like we said, it's in the right brain. It's in the place of Binah. It's in the place of wisdom. The right brain corresponds to the heart as well. The right brain extends down into the heart. That's the aspect of Binah, whatever that means. But the heart is Aaron HaKohen. Why is Aaron HaKohen the heart? Aaron is the aspect of Hoid. Moshe is Netzach. Moshe is someone who has to force the Jewish people to do God's will. Aaron HaKohen understands the people. Aaron speaks to their hearts. Aaron HaKohen, at times, he has to let them, so that they don't kill him, he has to let them do the Avera of the Egel HaZahav, of the golden calf. He speaks to their heart. He gives in to them. That's how it is, giving in. Lahodot means to give in. I'm moided to you. I admit to you. Aaron HaKohen knows how to give in to them when they need to be given into, so that they don't end up being destroyed. And Aaron HaKohen is the one who on the 8th day represents the heart, the aspect of Binah, the 8th aspect, which represents not just there's you and there's me. We have a bringing back together of those aspects which are separated. The 6th, which has to do with the male, and the 7th, which has to do with the female, they are separate. They come together on the 7th day. On Friday night, there's a coming together of male and female aspects. That's called Shalom. But there's a deeper thing that occurs once that bond has been completed, which is completed at the end of the 7th. Adam HaRishon blew it. Adam HaRishon was separated from God so he could come back together. Instead, he separated himself further. But here with the tabernacle, we have the separation, which is represented by Moshe. This building and destroying, forcing. It finishes on the 7th day. On the 8th day, Aaron HaKohen comes in. And you have that aspect, which is the Jewish people choosing to serve God in the way which is appropriate, as God has instructed. And that is the 8th aspect. So this is something which we see is a process which is true when it comes to learning Torah, when it comes to the final, the end of days, Armageddon, when there's a 7-year process through which we have to experience, as the Medrash describes, which I can't get into at length. It's true in regards to the creation of the world. We lost it at the creation of the world because of Adam HaRishon's sin. But here we have that when it comes to the tabernacle and the Mishkan, so we have that completion, that entering into the heart, that place where we choose. We now have chosen through the aspect of Hoid, through Aaron HaKohen's, through Aaron the priest's aspect, we have chosen to enter into a relationship with God. And it's not that God is forcing us, but that we are becoming one, as it were, with God. It is our will, God, to do your will. Our wills become one. The will of God and our will are no longer mitnaged. They are no longer punching up against each other, but rather they are coming in and becoming one. They're becoming one. And that's the aspect of the 8th aspect. And that's the transcendent aspect. That's the miraculous. That's where we enter the world of the miraculous, which is also the aspect of Hanukkah, which we mentioned very briefly, and I'm mentioning now very briefly. It's the aspect of where we become one with God. And when we become one with God, miracles happen. So that's the idea that I wanted to share. I want to bless you, and I ask you to bless me. Hashem should help us, that we should be zeiche to understand this process and see how this process manifests in our lives all the time. Hashem should help us to recognize it. Hashem should help us to bring it to completion, to recognize that the separation that we sometimes experience from God is only for the purpose of coming back into a relationship with God. Hashem should help us to sense that relationship. Hashem should help us to recognize the purpose of the separation and be rejoined again with God with an amazing recognition that our will is to do God's will. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.